Good afternoon. I am Paula McCoy, Executive Director of Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods, and I am very excited today to introduce our keynote speaker, John McKnight. John is Professor Emeritus of Education and Social Policy at the Northwestern University Institute for Policy Research and is co-director of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute, all in Evanston, Illinois. For nearly 3 decades, he has focused his research on community organizations and community development and neighborhood policy. He is a researcher, an author, and an engaging and thought-provoking speaker on asset-based thinking and community development. John visited our community in the early 1990s at the invitation of the Winston-Salem Foundation. He spoke at a number of community gatherings to shed light on his work around asset-based thinking and community development. And he planted many seeds at that time. From that visit sprung the roots of Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods, which began as a program of the foundation, later evolving into its own nonprofit. We will soon be celebrating our 25th year of working in neighborhoods to connect people, leverage resources, and strengthen voices to create safe, just, and self-determined neighborhoods. John's work also provided the basis for the foundation's early work in social capital building, ultimately resulting in the formation of ECHO, Everyone Can Help Out, a community-wide initiative to form diverse, authentic, and trusting relationships, which is now led by the work of the ECHO Network. As a result of his visit, asset-based thinking also became deeply rooted in the foundation's community grant-making program. Asset-based thinking is a different approach to community engagement and community development. It encompasses identifying and lifting up the gifts, skills, and talents of all community members, not focusing on their deficits, because all of our neighborhoods have wonderful assets to offer. Please join me in welcoming John McKnight back to Winston-Salem. We are excited to be receiving a booster shot of his asset-based messaging, giving us a chance to incorporate it and reincorporate it into our community's DNA.
Paul. Good. Wonderful. Well, good afternoon. Now, here I am, 25 years later, back in Winston-Salem, and it's just wonderful to see how the neighborhood movement has grown here. It's also, I think, really unusual to have a gathering like this one. Look who's here. People of every persuasion, every background. This is an amazing gathering. And I'd like you all to applaud each other for being here today. It's great. I also have wanted to come here because I think per capita you have more neighborhood organizations than any other city I know of. But you have 240,000 people. You have about 100 neighborhood organizations. That means there's a neighborhood organization for every 2,400 people. And that may be the greatest strength we have, although neighborhood organizations often aren't too visible. So your organization that supports them in their effort and has been vital is Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods. And it's known across the country for its work. And its work has been supported by the Winston-Salem Foundation over the years. So it's really worth our spending a little time thinking about neighborhoods today. I'd like you to take off your professional hats. Think of yourself as a neighbor. Think about your neighborhood. And one of the things we found in our research, which focuses on neighborhoods, is that most people don't really see what's there. I learned a lot about this one time when I was in Ireland. I love little towns, little places, little neighborhoods. And so I went to Ireland with my wife, and we rented a little Irish cottage in a little town. I think it had 25 houses. And outside of the town, there was a lake. And I love to fish, so I always carry a rod and reel with me. But I didn't have any bait. So I walked down the street. There's only one street, right? And there's only one store. And I walked up the path to the store. The door was open, and inside was an old, gray-haired Irishman. And in this store, he had 3 cans of peas, 2 potatoes, a bag of coal. Right? I don't think there was a huge market there. And I said to him, "Sir, I wonder if you sell any bait." And he looked at me curiously, and he said, what do you mean by bait? And I said, "Well, like worms." And he looked at me for a long time. And then he said, "Sonny," he said, "you walked up, you see the path out there, right? You see those big whitewashed stones that are on either side of the path? He says, I think if you just go and turn 1 or 2 of those over, you'll get all the worms you want." That transformed my life. Because what it showed me was that I didn't see what was all around me. But I had to look. And so the institute where I am has spent its years looking rather carefully at what's in neighborhoods that people use when they make things better. And we've done research now in over 300 neighborhoods and in 20 cities, looking at, asking people in the neighborhood, what have people done here together that made things better? And we've collected about 3,000 stories of neighbors making things better. And so then we asked, what is it that they use when they make things better? And no matter what they were doing, they might be focusing on the local economy or on youth or on health or whatever they were doing, there were 5 things that they drew on, that they used. All over the world now, we realize that in a neighborhood, in your neighborhood, there are 5 basic building blocks that are the basis for what people use when they make things better. And we named them assets, called them assets, but you might think of them as building blocks or ingredients. And so I thought I'd share with you quickly what those 5 are. And it's sort of like turning over the stone. What's in your neighborhood that can be used to make things better? Right? And so, is there anything on the screen? Okay. Now we have a high-tech division of Northwestern University, and I've asked them to help me do this map of community assets. And this is the first one, right? This is the universal asset that's in every neighborhood, and the principal asset for making things better, and it is local residents. But you notice the resident has a gift in their hand. And that's the key asset, is the gifts and the capacities of the people in the neighborhood. But the people in the neighborhood, you know the glass, is it half full or is it half empty? Incidentally, in Chicago, if I ask, people argue. But I've noticed in Winston-Salem, if I ask, they say yes. Right? More insightful, less contentious. But it's like each one of us, isn't it? We all have our capacities, skills, and gifts. We all have our deficits, problems, and needs. And no example of the 3,000 that we've gathered, stories or case studies, ever was based on focusing on needs. You can't do anything with a need. I'm needy in the sense of a deficit. I have a bad heart. I have a quadruple bypass operation. Nobody needs my bad heart in my neighborhood. What they need is the other capacities and gifts I have. So if you want neighborhoods to grow or even transform, you can't start with a needs survey. You can't do anything with a need. You have to know what are the assets in the neighborhood, and the principal one is the gifts and the capacities of local people. The second asset in the stories and in the neighborhood is the local clubs, groups, and associations. And they are, in fact, when we ask people, how did this initiative that made things better start? In over half the cases, they started with little local clubs, groups, and associations. So if you want to know what's the fountainhead of community change, there it is. And why is that? Well, we have a theory. And the theory is that an association is the way the gifts and the capacities of local people put together get magnified or amplified. It's making more than the parts by having a sum that is greater. And so if we want to talk about empowerment of people, the principal tool for empowerment is local associations. Here's a list. I don't know whether you can see these things or not, but the list of typical kinds of associations. They're smaller, face-to-face groups where the members do the work, and they're not paid. So they're not agencies, they're not not-for-profits, they're not paid, right? And there's examples of them. Now, associations then are the second asset in the neighborhood and the principal fountainhead for community change that is indigenous. The third asset is the local institutions, that is groups of people in the neighborhood who come together, but they are paid. And we all know there are three kinds of institutions. There are businesses, there are not-for-profit institutions, and then there are government institutions. And so when we went to the high-tech graphics center at Northwestern and said, can you give us a symbol for our map of these institutions? This is what they came back with. Right there. You got those around here? Well, the important thing is that the institutions are triangles. The associations are circles. And what our research made clear to us is that each have a role, but neither can do what the other can do. And especially, there are a whole bunch of things that local associations, and especially neighborhood associations, can do that no matter how hard they try, institutions can't do. So understanding that, we have two tools for community change is very, very important. The fourth asset is the land. And that's what the black square is around the outside. So you can see this asset map has individuals, associations, institutions, and then the land on which these actors, these human actors, play out their relationships. And the land itself is an asset. Every vacant lot is a potential garden. Right? So we can see many ways of re-understanding the assets that is the land in a neighborhood. Last asset isn't on the map because it isn't a thing. It is that in most all the stories, there are exchanges. People are sharing, trading, bartering, buying and selling. And many of those exchanges create what is called social capital. So that's our asset map. And what I can say is, in your neighborhood, you've got a rich set of resources. But to know what the assets are doesn't make anything change. And so we also can say that in every single story, there was a key to making the assets get used. And the key was a person or an association or an institution that saw how important it was to connect the assets. Every one of the 3,000 neighborhood improvement stories was about assets becoming connected that weren't connected before. And so when Bob Putnam talks to you about the growth of social capital, it depends not on leadership, it depends on connectorship. And so we want to commend to everybody, who are the connectors in the neighborhood? How can we lift them up, ask them to lead us, right? Because of this very special skill. Now, what I'd really like to do is to focus on two of these assets. And it's the first two, the gifts of individuals and the powers of association. And the reason I want to focus on those two, there are a couple of reasons. The first reason is that the greatest single unique American invention is the association. Is these small face-to-face groups where the members do the work and they're not paid. Now, you can't read this, I don't think, but this is a quote from Alexis de Tocqueville, a great visitor who came here in 1831. Young man, 23 years of age, took a 9-month tour of North America and went back to France and wrote the greatest book even today about us, about America. It's called Democracy in America. If you haven't read it, read it. It turns the stone over for you. You'll understand us better than even understanding yourself. But in the book, he says, and I won't read the whole thing, I know you can't read it, but nothing, in my opinion, is more deserving of our attention than the intellectual and moral associations of America. And then he goes on to say, but they're hard to discover. You can discover all kinds of things about government and about business, but about these small groups, he said, they are not very visible, and yet in democratic countries, the science of association is the mother of science. The progress of all the rest depends upon the progress associations have made. And we know, we have a historian where I work, and he says when they dig up the United States, 4,000 years from now, like we're digging up Egypt, they're going to find an amazing thing, and that is that America was a wonderful synthesizer of things from all kinds of other countries, because most of the people came from other countries. But there were two unique American inventions. One is jazz. And it's not a joke. It's true. Right? And the other is associations. So they are historically the way we bring people together to multiply their gifts and talents and to create new futures and give the individual power and a voice. Right? So they are very important. And they are the place where individuals' gifts and collective activity come together. And so I want to focus there because, and another reason to focus there is because the heart of our democracy is not our power to vote. The heart of our democracy is our power to associate and express ourselves. So when the founding people, the fathers, I guess in this case, came together and wrote our Constitution, they wanted to make absolutely sure that the most important, powerful thing we had was absolutely protected. And so they said every American, above all, has a set of rights, but the first one is the most important, and that is freedom of expression and freedom of association. And the heart of democracy is our clubs, groups, and associations, not our institutions. So if we let our associational life grow rusty, our democracy will atrophy. Because there were two great tyrannies. I lived through a lot of the last century. And there were two great tyrannies, the Nazis and the communists. And they had great institutions. But what they did was they made illegal and did everything they could to do away with the gifts of individuals and their free expression, and to do away with their power to associate. And actually, the collapse of communism happened through an association of workers in Poland. That's where it came from. Incidentally, I learned from some people in Poland that they called associations during the communist era a conspiracy. So if we want our freedom to be meaningful, we'll have to use our principal tools, and it's individuals and associations and their interplay and growth, and that's what we're being also by social capital. Now, let's look a little closer at the neighborhood, and let's look and see if we were looking to see what's in your neighborhood in terms of the individuals and their gifts and the associations and their activities. Let me see if I can share you something we've learned from some neighborhoods. There's a neighborhood in Chicago that began to think, we believe it does take a village to raise a child. And we are not a village raising a child. We are families who turn our children over to institutions. And we got a lot of trouble because of that. Because there is no village surrounding the families. And it is village building that is the most important thing we can do if we really want to help children, families, and the economy. So they said that maybe where we ought to start is finding out what people have in the neighborhood that they are prepared to contribute to the neighborhood, to the block. We're thinking small, a local place. And they began by having an organizer with the neighborhood organization go door to door and knock on the door of 17 households on 3 blocks in their neighborhood and ask the residents there, can you tell me what are your gifts? Can you tell me what are your skills? Can you tell me what are your passions? Can you tell me what you know well enough that you could teach it? Right? Now, this particular neighborhood is the 3rd lowest income neighborhood in Chicago. It's an African American neighborhood. 20% of the people at the time they did this are unemployed. Right? And so if you're a deficit thinker, it looks like a troubled place. But let me tell you who's in the 17 houses. Who's there? Can you see it in the back? These are the gifts that 17 people say they have and that they're willing to contribute to their neighbors on the block, adults and young people. 17 people. Go back again. Their gifts. And the way they framed it was a gift is something you're born with, not something you learn. It's your gift. Incidentally, and we've seen this, the average response rate is 3 to 4 gifts that people tell you about. The same is true of the other 3 questions. Here are the gifts. Then, what skills? What passions? Incidentally, it turns out people have more passions than anything else. And the question is one in which to say, what do you care enough about that you've acted on it? These are the passions. Look at that. And then perhaps the most amazing one of all, this one. What could you teach? And because I want to emphasize this, you can't all see that, can you? Everybody can? So here are the gifts, skills, passions, and teachables, they call it, of 17 people in about the poorest neighborhood in Chicago. Now, it makes very clear, isn't it, why a needs survey is so absolutely useless. And why an asset inventory is absolutely the starting point for the revival of community life, the building of social capital, and the strengthening of our democracy. Now, this neighborhood organization had an after-school, this is the neighborhood organization, has some block clubs, right? But they had an after-school program in the local school in which the local school, which is a junior and a high school together, right, sent them, asked them to start an at-risk youth program. Anybody here know a youth that is not at risk? I had 2 sons. I could imagine they were at risk. So it's a silly idea, right? But at any rate, they sent 40 kids after school to the neighborhood organization where they did sports, that kind of thing. And so the neighborhood group said, let's see if they want to learn anything that the people around this very school want to teach. So they made a list of all the things these 17 people could teach and gave them to the 40 kids in the at-risk program who the school thinks won't learn, can't learn, or are disruptive. And they said, now, here are some things you might want to learn, but you got to be serious about it because we're starting Tuesday morning. And we're going to let you be in touch with somebody that can teach you this. And so here's what the kids decided on. And that, can you see that at all? So this is a frequency list of what the kids wanted to learn that the neighbors could teach. And there are 40 kids all told. Over half wanted to learn cooking, but that didn't mean personal cooking. It meant cooking like a chef or a cook in a restaurant, because a lot of people they knew who had jobs as chefs or cooks. Second, banking, right? Youth at-risk program, bunch of kids. Second thing they want to learn the most about is banking. Who knew that? Third thing they want to know is about computer technology. How to start a business. Real estate. And skating, that drops in there. Typing. Black history. Think about that list. The incredible thing is that most of those things are not taught in the school. And most of those things are what kids need to know if they're going to have a real vocational future. So look, if we understood the gifts and the capacities seriously of people in your neighborhood and connected them to the young people in the neighborhood, right, we would see two things change radically. And the first is we would see the youth problem decline. Because there isn't a youth problem. There is a failed community problem of adults who are not connected to young people. And they want to know what we know. What's missing? Two things. Number one, we're not organized to find out what people's gifts are. We're organized to find out what's wrong with them. And number two, and most important, nothing would have happened with this if they hadn't had connectors. Putting the kids together with the people who wanted to teach them. So I think the beginning of the renewal of American communities starts with understanding that every household has teachers and every kid is waiting to learn. But it means that we can't say the problem is a failing school. The problem is we are not a village raising our children. And we can't, because look what we have to offer. So the second thing I think that happened in these kinds of initiatives is the schools will get much better because we've unloaded from the school a whole bunch of functions that us community people, us neighbors, have dumped on the teachers. So the real issue, I don't think, is school reform. The real issue is the recovery of the community's function through its associations and its individuals to become a village connected to raise its children. Now, I think this is such a wonderful possibility that we're beginning to see and do some work with some neighborhoods and some schools that say, we want to become an educating neighborhood. And so there are some places where they say, we are a welcoming neighborhood. But every neighborhood can be an educating neighborhood. And that's such a wonderful, wonderful possibility. Because I don't have time to show it. But when these kids were asked, what do you know well enough you could teach another youth or another adult? They have a list as well. So imagine I screw up on my computer all the time. There are 40 kids all around me who could straighten me out. So it isn't just us, adults, it's young people. So supposing we know both. But the adults have to teach, but the young people have to teach, and we're making that connection. And then we can say, and one other thing that helps us be an educating community is the school. But the big thing is us. And our new asset map is a map of all the educational possibilities that exist in this neighborhood. Now, we have a website. Let me see if I can skip to it quickly here. This is it. And posted on that website under publications is one called The Educating Community that describes in much more detail than I can today what it looks like when you really discover all of the teaching possibilities that a neighborhood has. I'm 83 years of age. I'm sad about that for a particular reason. We've got rusty neighborhoods. I'm afraid at the citizen level, we may be as bad as almost the Congress. You can't be blaming them. We are not villages the way we could be. And if I were here for the next 25 years, this is the future. That we see ourselves as educating neighborhoods. Reestablishing relationships between adults and young people around productive activities. And then we'll have a village that can raise a child. Where the people can say what people said when I was a young man in a low-income neighborhood in Cincinnati. I can remember, we're talking 1931, 32. People then would say to you on the block, all these kids are my kids. All these kids are my kids. That's America's greatest future. And the wonderful thing is, it doesn't cost a penny. And it makes citizenship come alive once again. Oh, I wish I was younger. Because you are going to do this kind of renewal that will bring